Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really plunging into a stack of your sources, these excerpts from a narrative text. They give us these amazing glimpses into the lives of Peter and Joan.
Two young people, yeah, set against this backdrop of the early 20th century, a time of huge change.
Absolutely. So our mission here really is to journey through these pages, not just retell the story, but pull out the key insights.
Exactly. We want to understand their childhoods, their education, which sounds interesting, the people who shaped them and how they navigated those massive shifts, especially, of course, the First World War looming over everything.
Think of it as getting the essence. Yeah. Guided by the text, we've got sources on family dynamics, very different ideas on raising kids.
Wildly different, yeah.
The flaws in traditional schooling, new ideas popping up about society, empire, and just the sheer personal impact of these global events.
It's quite a journey the sources take us on, from like the nursery right through to the war and whatever came after.
Let's jump right in. At the start, Peter's birth. The text paints this vivid picture. The dawn-fleshed sky, the fresh air.
Beautiful imagery, yeah. But then contrasted with Peter himself. Very puckered and ugly and red and pitiful.
Not quite the cherubic ideal. It sets a tone, doesn't it? That mix of the ideal and the messy reality.
Definitely. Even his dad, Arthur, seems surprised. Didn't expect a baby to be exquisite, but then he holds Peter and, well, he sees it.
And their family life, particularly the Snubland aunts. Sounds unconventional. There's Aunt Phyllis first.
Right. Witty, her hats are esprit, she misquotes things artistically, even jokes about religion, sort of free spirit maybe.
And then the contrast, Aunt Phoebe.
Oh, completely different. Fantastically serious, the source says. Her hats are beyond a joke, and she has these very specific Ruskinian views about children.
Okay, let's pause there. Ruskinian. What are we talking about here? What does that signify?
John Ruskin. Huge influence back then. Think art critic, social thinker. He connected beauty, nature, morality, social justice, all that stuff.
Right.
So Ruskinian here suggests Phoebe's ideas aren't just random. They're tied to this philosophy of nurturing a child's natural sensitivity, their connection to beauty, seeing it as almost spiritual, fundamentally good.
Got it. So she wants to surround the child with beautiful things, get him used to the nude from early on, linked to innocent amusements.
Yeah, and no hats or boots, because that's constraining, like tight lacing. The first years should be this long dream of loveliness and spontaneous activity.
Which, as the source points out with a bit of humor, just overstimulates poor baby Peter. Leads to tears.
And you have Mary, the maid, watching all this, clearly mistrustful. You get that little detail.
And into this mix comes Joan, described initially almost like a black-headed, black-eyed doll.
Yeah, and their first interactions. It's all competition, especially over Nobby.
Peter's wooden doll. That leads to Peter's first spanking, right? Because Joan touched Nobby.
Exactly. Nobby is clearly a huge deal for Peter. Has to have him under his pillow every night. Nobby takes you off to dreamland.
It's more than just a toy, then.
Oh, much more. He's like the source of information and imagination. He knows what was inside a ship. He's been near lions.
And that line about lions is great. Peter asks if they're dreadful.
And Nobby says, most lions will get away from a man if they can. Not always, though. It's wonderful, that mix of reassurance and, a little bit of reality creeping in.
Tells you so much about childhood, that blend of fantasy and just starting to grasp that the world can be dangerous. The sources also put this family in context, don't they? This idea of a real England versus a superficial England.
Yes, the superficial England of the genteel that looked to Osborne and Balmoral.
Yeah.
Court circles, basically.
Where court taste was a joke.
Right. This real England is described as more dissentient and individualistic, and Peter's parents belong to this large class of detached people.
So what does that tell us about them, their social standing?
It suggests they're maybe educated, possibly a bit bohemian, intellectual perhaps.
Yeah.
People who aren't playing the usual social games, not conforming to the aristocracy. They have their own minds, maybe their own means, operating outside the rigid social structures.
Okay, so that's the early setup. Then, bang, the sources shift focus to Oswald Sydenham, his life before he becomes Peter's guardian in Tanganyika.
Yeah, and what a contrast. The environment there sounds brutal, chaotic.
How so?
Sources talk about constant violence, conflicts between Arab adventurers, Black Portuguese, Biao and Ngoni Zulus, and then European agents stirring the pot with annexational propaganda. Just a mess.
And Oswald wasn't just watching.
No, he was involved, helping reconstruct a steamboat, fighting Arab slavers. There are these glimpses, like a blistered and wounded Negro standing painfully to tell his story.
Grim.
And the sources stress the sheer difficulty, the lack of control, even self-control. Thirst and lust racked every human being. It even mentions missionaries forced into native marriages rather than burned. Stark stuff.
Yet Oswald holds on to his beliefs. Science, civilization.
Yeah. Human will and self-control. He has this mantra, this determination. We'll get things straight here presently and never say damn till you're dead.
Fascinating. Trying to impose order on chaos. And his personal story is tied up in this too. He left England because of Dolly, Peter's mother.
Right. She chose Arthur over him, and he left in a fever of thwarted loneliness. You see how deep that went when he hears about her death years later?
What was his reaction?
Initially just rage and jealousy, cursing her, calling Arthur a fool. But then there's this shift, a gleam of imagination, the text calls it. He sees her white and wet and pitiful.
Wow. From anger to empathy.
Exactly. Heartbreaking, really. He regrets not having stuck to her, not held out for her. It clearly scarred him. And then later, physically, he's scarred too. Blackwater fever stops him going back to Africa.
Blackwater fever? What exactly was that? Sounds serious.
Oh, it was deadly serious. A severe complication of malaria. Destroyed red blood cells, hence the name, from the dark urine. High fever, jaundice. If you got it, returning to a malaria zone was often out of the question.
So it's not just an illness, it's a life changer for him. An end to his African life.
Pretty much. He has to accept these thoroughly disagreeable limitations. And the sources mentioned his face is left disfigured in two halves.
A physical reminder of the harshness he endured.
And the limits he now faces, yeah.
Okay, let's switch gears again to Lady Charlotte. Another stubborn aunt, but sounds like she's from a totally different planet than Phoebe and Phyllis.
Totally. She seems to represent that superficial England, conventional social climbing. Relies on people like Mr. Grimes for advice on how to navigate society.
And she discovers Peter hasn't been christened, and Joan, she asks if Joan is what's called a love child.
Yes, that discovery throws her completely. She's desperate to keep it quiet. Everything must be done quietly and privately.
And Grimes, her advisor, has a plan.
Yeah, a sort of infiltration strategy. Gain the confidence of the children, and crucially, and of the children's maid. She's rather an important factor. That's Mary again, who deeply mistrusts Lady Charlotte.
So this leads to a showdown. Lady Charlotte tries to get into the Inglenook. Where exactly is that again?
The sources just describe it as the place where Peter and Joan are living with Aunt Phoebe. The name Inglenook suggests maybe a cozy cottage, perhaps a bit isolated.
Okay, so Lady Charlotte tries to get in, but Aunt Phoebe blocks her.
Fiercely. Shows a manifest determination to upset any proper arrangement. Refuses to say where the kids are without a court order, accuses Lady Charlotte of kidnapping.
Wow, intense. And it escalates to the forced christening scene?
Oh, absolutely. Lady Charlotte just barrels ahead, despite being anxious about various things. It happens at Otfield Church. Mr. Wiscott holds Peter. There's this struggle at the font. Water splashes everywhere.
And Peter cries out, not for his aunt, but for Mary.
Mary, the maid. His security blanket in that moment, and Aunt Phoebe's reaction.
Predictable.
Pure melodrama. They're little white souls, and then threatens to call her solicitor.
Okay, so that seems to be Lady Charlotte's breaking point. Because when Mr. Sycamore turns up, mentions Oswald is coming back as guardian.
She completely loses it. Terror. Visions of Aunt Phoebe, but doubled. Gasps, smelling salts, the whole 9 yards.
She tries to backpedal, claims she's done her duty.
Washes her hands of it. Blames Peter, saying he's already thoroughly corrupted. Claims he somehow ran away from her, even though he was clearly with Phoebe.
And then there's that strange line. She can't or won't produce Joan. She can't be produced.
Yeah, the text just leaves that hanging, doesn't it? It's really unsettling. Is she hiding her? Did something happen? We don't know. But Lady Charlotte's reaction is immediate. Bolt.
Flees the country.
Orders hasty packing for Italy. Grabs her alpine sticks, tea basket, the works. Fakes a sudden attack when Oswald actually arrives. Off to Switzerland or Italy for the winter, presumably.
Oh. Wow. Okay, so back to Peter and Joan. They seem safe at the Inglenook after all that drama. What about their schooling there? Miss Mills and Miss Murgatroyd.
Doesn't sound too impressive, does it? Miss Mills gets confused explaining basic maths like parallelograms. Her memory's muddled.
And Miss Murgatroyd. She sounds rigid, hates their drawings.
Calls them mere scribbling, out of proportion. Wants strong, firm outlines. Meanwhile, Peter's drawing things with an extra eye. Joan's doing long spirals.
So a real clash between formal teaching and their actual creativity.
Exactly. The text suggests their imaginative play was way more important. Nabi stories, obviously, but also making these detailed African scenes, Zulu warriors, Egyptian camel corps.
This imaginative world, the saga of Bungo Peter, it ends when they get bikes.
Yeah, after Joan's 7th birthday. The source notes, rather dryly, you cannot tell legends on a bicycle.
Haha. Modern tech kills the vibe, but they do get other creative input. Sheldricks.
Right, they introduce theater, charades. Starting with A Midsummer Night's Dream, Peter plays Oberon and Thisbe, Joan is Puck. And Joan does this dance her mother, Dolly, invented. A nice touch, keeping Dolly present somehow.
We also see some rough and tumble childhood stuff, like a fight with someone called Winterbaum.
Yeah, and the interesting detail is that Peter's experiences with Joan in a rage taught him how to handle himself, how to parry blows.
So even their conflicts were a kind of preparation. Fascinating. Then Peter goes off to High Cross School. Mr. Grimes shows up again.
Briefly, for the inspection, notes Peter has no stockings and haven't got a hat. The school itself, described as shabby.
And the atmosphere.
Sounds pretty grim. The other boys are hostile. Peter finds one boy, Probin, particularly repellent, senses disgust and dread.
The staff don't sound much better. Mainwaring, Smithers for botany, Noakley making them run before breakfast.
Yeah, school life is depicted as all whispers, paper darts, reading forbidden books on the sly.
And the curriculum, classics, botany.
But no other science teaching. And the reason, science teaching requires apparatus, and apparatus costs money. Very pragmatic.
Especially when you consider the school's supposed purpose.
Which is incredibly grand, right? To grind and polish boys for the greatest, most civilized, and most civilizing empire the world has ever seen.
So how does the text frame that gap between the lofty goal and the limited reality?
It feels like a clear critique. They're meant to be preparing for this huge imperial role. But the tools are lacking. The focus is narrow classics over practical knowledge or any real understanding of the world they're supposed to run. Peter's experience with the school hierarchy, with Probin and Ames dominating, is also part of this grinding.
But Peter's drawing talent comes out here.
Yeah, he ends up drawing for Ames and Probin, everything from myths like George and the Dragon to a savage woman, even a girl bathing, that Ames compares to Ally Sloper's Half Holiday.
Ally Sloper, what was that?
Oh, that was a really early, really popular British comic paper. Known for being a bit, well, lowbrow, maybe slightly vulgar sometimes.
So Peter's drawing from popular culture, too, not just high art. A mix of mythic and maybe slightly naughty everyday stuff.
Exactly. Which, ironically, lands him in hot water. Mr. Mainwaring canes him for it. The description's quite brutal. Cut. A kick. Cut. Silent riddle.
Punished for creativity.
And the text adds that Mainwaring was secretly glad when Peter left later. Suggests Peter didn't quite fit the mold, maybe disrupted things.
And that caning, plus the general misery, leads Peter to run away.
Yeah. He asks people for directions, but gets these wildly wrong distances. Maybe people just didn't know, or maybe they were messing with him.
He meets a few characters. A gardener, a woman trimming a hedge, old Groombridge.
Right, who tells this sad story about drowning kittens, which apparently really affects Joan later, showing how these little encounters ripple outwards.
And the runaway attempt ends dramatically near Bolter's Lock, the boat incident.
Finds a boat, drifts off, tries to look like he doesn't belong there, eventually gets found. They initially think he's drowned.
And when they find him,
he just breaks down, sobbing. So remorseful and so grossly sentimental that even Noakley was surprised. A huge release of everything he'd been holding in.
Okay, so after that drama, Oswald returns to England, takes over as guardian, but he's hesitant at first.
Very. His first reaction is basically, I can't do this. His own family should deal with him. You know, your own people must see to your own breed.
He's conflicted.
Deeply. He's thinking about Dolly, about the child that now could never be born. It's a heavy burden. And then Peter comes back from school, clearly damaged, scarred badly, the text says. School brings associations of the utmost dreariness. He hates the idea of more school.
So Oswald changes tack.
Completely. He decides he needs to consult the young man on his destiny. He's critical of just book learning, emphasizes needing things you ought to see and handle, learning by doing.
Reflecting his own practical experiences in Africa.
Makes sense, doesn't it? Meanwhile, Peter's all focused on Joan coming back, making welcome signs, a triumphal arch. Their time apart seems to have really sparked his interest in her.
And Joan's return. How's that described?
Visually striking. She's white-faced, standing stockishly. Peter has this crown and scepter ready for a restoration ceremony.
A restoration.
Yeah, like restoring her to her rightful place, maybe.
Mm.
Her reaction is just whispered, "It's lovely." And it's lovely. Seems like a huge relief for her. And Mrs. Pybus, whoever she was,
Someone unpleasant from her past.
sounds like it. She passed like an evil dream. Gone, thankfully.
And Joan seems changed, more confident.
Startlingly so. She tells Oswald point blank, "I don't believe there's a God," and adds, "Peter knows there isn't."
Wow, how does Oswald handle that?
Brilliantly, I think. He doesn't freak out. He's surprised, but engages. Asks if Peter has looked everywhere. Then dryly assures her there isn't a hell, but adds it's rather a pity for Mrs. Pybus.
Huh. That shows his character, doesn't it? Open-minded, a bit wry, not just imposing rules. He's willing to talk about their atheism.
Exactly. Then he tries to find a good school for Peter, which turns out to be a nightmare.
Why? What happens?
Scholastic agents find him unsettling, his appearance, maybe his directness. They're hostile and uncharitable. He questions everything. Why just books and maps for geography? Why no lantern slides and museum visits? Still no science equipment.
So he launches into a critique of the whole system.
A scathing one. He feels English education completely fails to teach purpose. Not just king and country slogans, but the real aim of the country, the reality of the empire, responsibility to Asia, Africa, a basic philosophy of life and duty.
He thinks it's all just incidental.
Yeah, relies on incidental talk and just misses 3/4 of the boys. Doesn't really connect.
And his view of Oxford, any better?
Not really. He sees it as tired, self-consciously picturesque, beautiful, maybe, but out of touch. He hates the rule of scholarly discretion. Learn, obey, create nothing, initiate nothing, have no troublesome doubts.
Sounds like stagnation.
That's the sense you get. A system stuck in tradition, afraid of new ideas. He thinks only catastrophe can convince them to change. And on top of all this, Oswald's struggling financially as guardian, dismissing staff, living a nomadic existence for a while.
Right. So Peter and Joan move into adolescence. Their inner worlds seem to be developing quite differently. Joan's especially.
Yeah, her inner life is described really vividly. These anticipatory sketches of her future, often involving being a king's mistress. She blends figures like Joan of Arc, Jane Shore, Nell Gwynn.
A sort of fantasy rebellion.
Seems like it. And interestingly, the source says she has this curious bar in her mind. She just can't imagine Peter as a lover, despite how close they are.
Her interests are changing too, the suffragette movement.
She gets into it, yeah. Adored Pankhurst and Frobisher, apparently, but secretly doubted the old vote. School at Highmorton sounds lively on the go.
Yeah.
She liked the work, but clashed with teachers, seen as disorderly.
And Mrs. Pybus still lingers, these waxed-up memories.
Yeah, leaving a lasting impression. Suggests that figure, maybe representing repression or something, had a deep impact.
And Peter's influence is pushing Joan towards rebellion, too.
Seems so. Questioning rules, getting interested in undesirable people in unseemly places, moving away from being a timid prude.
While she's doing that, Peter's at Cambridge becoming a cynical man of the world.
Right. Joan goes to Cambridge, too. Meets Gavin Huntley, a novelist. Finds him most interesting, more amusing, maybe, than Peter at this stage.
And their dynamic shifts, Peter and Joan.
Yeah, the source says they feel they interfere with each other, decide to go their own ways. There's this really sharp argument when Peter criticizes Hetty Reinhardt.
The woman he's involved with.
Right. Joan defends her own judgment fiercely, savagely even. Claims she can smell what she is across a room.
A very visceral reaction.
Totally. Peter thinks she has no right to say that. It just shows how they're drifting apart, seeing things very differently.
And Joan goes through a personal crisis around this time.
A big one. Feels lost, no object in life, no star to steer by, full of energy, the fever of life, but with a terrible urgency. Wonders about her mother. Can't connect romantically with the guys around her. Troop keeps trying. Wilmington adores her.
How does she handle them?
Avoids Troop. Has his key dance with Huntley. Tells Wilmington straight up, "You're lovely, I'd die for you." But she doesn't love anyone. She just dances. Ouch.
Meanwhile, Aunt Phoebe adopts Hetty Reinhardt as a protege. Strange pairing.
Very strange. Starts talking about Hetty's beauty and courage. And Phoebe's own activism gets more intense, talking about prison, trying to assault police. That scene at the anti-suffrage meeting Peter's friend describes.
Shows how passionate people were getting about these issues.
Definitely. The sources then talk about two big shocks for Joan. The first involves Lady Charlotte again.
Yeah, Lady Charlotte sees Joan with Huntley, refers to him snidely as her gentleman friend.
And that seemingly small remark hits hard. the implication of impropriety delivered with that judgment. Huntley shields her, but the shock registers.
And the second shock comes via gossip.
From Adela, talking about Peter and Hetty, mentions Hetty's studio is convenient. Peter's just amused, not even jealous, while Hetty's really in love.
How does Joan react to that?
Explosively. Love. That love. It makes me sick, calls Peter dirty Peter. Adelaide tries to smooth it over, you know. A man isn't made like that. It isn't the same thing to men.
But for Joan, it's a moment of total disillusionment. With Peter, maybe with conventional ideas about love.
Seems like it. Contrasts sharply with her own search for something real. This whole period culminates in a scene at a dance. Hetty's there, wearing this really out-there outfit.
Described in detail.
Yeah, spangled black, Phrygian cap, tricolor skirt, very low-cut décolletage, like something from La Vie Parisienne.
That French magazine, known for being a bit risque.
Exactly. Joan's in black and red, inventing dances. Oswald's watching her grace, probably seeing this complex young woman emerging.
And all this is happening as the world is sliding towards war. Oswald and Peter travel.
Their observations are telling. Petrograd, barbaric greatness, limits of mankind. Moscow. Seeing Chekhov performed well at the art theater.
And Berlin.
Oswald focuses on the young students there, sees puerile militarism, obsession with formalities. He senses Germany is going hard, maybe too hard too fast. A late entry into world politics, making them naive about their world mission. He feels a dangerous energy.
And amidst all this, Oswald's worried about Joan.
Increasingly so. Feels the ending of adolescence is critical for her. Worries her experiments could be fatal.
And then the world crashes in. The Austrian ultimatum to Serbia.
Right. Oswald actually draws Joan into the excitement, the news unfolding.
Peter and Hetty are in Italy when it all kicks off. Peter's reaction.
Pure outrage. Calls the Kaiser the accursed fool at Potsdam, even talks about assassinating him.
Intense. And that leads him to enlist.
Yeah. He argues with Hetty about it. For him, it's about honor. Since Britain doesn't have conscription yet, when your country leaves it to you, you're bound in honor. He rushes back to England.
What's the mood like in England then, according to the sources?
Mainly indignation against Germany. A feeling that peace could have held, but Austria and Germany pushed it. A sense Germany wanted and planned for war.
Peter and Joan talk before he goes to the front.
Yes. And the source notes, Joan watches him as acutely and as unsuspectedly as a mother might watch a grown-up son. Peter seems almost excited, keen, despite everything.
We get other perspectives, too. Bunny's letter to Joan.
Yeah, really honest and vulnerable. Admits he's afraid of going pacifist right out of funk. Hates loud noises, never seen a dead body, felt sick dissecting a rabbit. Thinks he'll run away. But ends with, we've got to. Captures that feeling of dread mixed with duty.
And Huntley writes, too.
Simply, the world has gone mad, and tells Joan he wants her. Very direct.
And for Joan herself, the war is a major turning point.
Huge. She goes from observer to being socialized, losing that innocent detachment. The sources mention a brief moment of extravagant idealism early on, Ireland, India responding.
But it fades.
Quickly. The text blames undereducation, double-mindedness, slackness, poor leadership. Basically, the country wasn't equipped morally or intellectually to sustain that initial idealistic surge.
Peter ends up in the flying services, with the flower of the youth.
That's the phrase used. His training sounds intense, the aerodrome like a demented ostrich, initial fear, then mastering landings, spins, looping the loop.
But they lacked guidance.
Seemingly. Picking up cues from Kipling and the music halls, conversations, each other, the social code varied. Talk of mesalliance and Messalina.
Mesalliance and Messalina, what's that about?
Mesalliance is marrying beneath your station, socially unequal relationships. Messalina was Emperor Claudius's wife, notorious for being promiscuous.
So it suggests the mess chat was full of gossip about status, scandal, maybe a kind of cynical worldliness.
Probably. A way of coping, maybe. Peter's squadron is described as slightly different, pleasant men of the irresponsible school who avoided heavy drinking and dissipation.
Just before Peter leaves, Wilmington tries again with Joan.
Yes, declares his love. And Joan's reply is just devastatingly honest. It's not much good, Billy, is it, if I do? Reveals she's loved Peter since she was 6.
Poor Wilmington.
His reaction says it all. He's always been there. Just quiet heartbreak.
And the sources reveal Peter has this secret resolution about the war.
Yes, quite remarkable. He decides he will never fire his rifle so that it would hurt anyone, won't use his bayonet, only his hands in close combat if absolutely necessary.
Wow. a kind of hidden pacifism, even while enlisting and seeming keen.
It's incredibly complex, isn't it? That internal conflict.
Then Peter gets injured. Plane crash.
Yeah, a nosedive, pulls out but hits the ground hard, coughing up blood, retching, badly hurt.
He experiences delirium.
And it's described in this really strange, symbolic way. He sees God in a little office, asks directions from a girl guide who looks like both Joan and Hetty, and who tends to loiter in the passages. Very dreamlike.
In hospital, he's visited by Mir Jalaluddin.
Right, who talks about stale ideas about countries, suggesting the real England or America isn't on record, challenging those fixed national identities.
And Mir asks about Joan.
Yeah. Peter's reply is quite brief. Foster sister. She drives a big car about London, a bit detached, considering their history.
Peter's own thoughts in hospital are quite grand, though.
Absolutely. He starts thinking of himself as man, with this destiny to establish justice, unity, rule the world, then the stars. His idea of India becomes linked to Mir Jalaluddin's face.
He's thinking on a huge scale.
Moving beyond the personal to this almost cosmic sense of human potential. As he recovers, he thinks about seeing Hetty, the yielding fair, and writes to her about his injury. They've clipped one wing forever, accepting it.
Ames visits him, too.
It talks about Probin failing, being eaten up by something like a fever. Ames himself is focused on getting married, St. Paul's method, apparently, and quotes someone saying everyone's rotten.
A pretty cynical post-war view from Ames.
Definitely. But Ames also describes Peter's heroic act capturing 9 Germans single-handedly, calls it sheer blank recklessness as it put their wind up absolutely. But his final assessment is queer end, queer chap altogether.
So that's the external view. Heroic but strange.
Well, we know Peter's internal reality is much more complex.
Yeah.
He comes home on leave, injured, reunited with Joan.
How does she react to his injury?
Simple relief. Sees his injured arm and just says, good old arm.
He promises to teach her to fly.
Yeah, picks up some American slang. That's a promise. She says she'd rather learn from you than anyone. We try to reconnect, revisit old childhood haunts.
But the tension is still there, the unspoken feelings.
Described as invisible barriers. Joan can't tell him how she feels. After he leaves that time, she's white and haggard, in agony.
Then the scene at the station when he's leaving again.
Hugely emotional. Silence. Poplars swaying. Joan's inner turmoil is intense. This is the end. But I'll tell him.
And she does.
Oh, she does, in this huge outburst.
Yeah.
Calls him a blind fool, says he's going off to beastliness and vulgarity, and then lays it all out. What can Hetty give him that she can't? Have I no life? Have I no beauty? Are you afraid of me? Then tells him to get on the train.
Raw, desperate. Does it work?
It does. Peter gets out at the next stop. Stand-in. Walks back. Oswald sees him, completely stunned. Good God, Peter, what brings you back? And Peter, looking wretched, just says, I've been making a fool of myself. It's the turning point. He chooses her.
So after the war, Peter's reflecting.
Yeah, on the big riddle. Why, if the world is like this, why are we in it? And thinking about Joan gives him some kind of anchor. Something about Joan that almost persuades me there must be something absolutely right about things. She gives him shapeless courage.
Even facing all that darkness, she represents something positive.
Exactly. Oswald's struggling too, post-war. Physically limited, bad knee, insomnia, anxiety. He sees the war primarily as an educational breakdown. Fixing education is his big hope.
He's trying to write his valediction.
Yeah, like a final statement of beliefs. But he's struggling, feeling lonely, filled with uncontrollable self-pity. He's deeply frustrated with British institutions, sees no imagination, no real change, just the same in every branch.
He dislikes blaming individuals.
Right. Wants to focus on the undramatic general wrongs, the systemic failures. His educational vision in the valediction is radical. The core idea, the individual must live in the species. Mankind, that is the only limit.
He uses that image of education history being like upholsterers fixing a carpet.
Yeah, blowing carpet, just patching over fundamental problems.
He contrasts German and U.S. education.
This says Germany set fire to the phoenix destruction, but maybe rebirth. U.S. education taught citizenship, maybe shallower, but with valuable candor, generosity, debt to the common schools. He thinks the League of Nations, world peace needs real substance, earned by the war's bloodletting.
And calls for the university militant. What's that mean?
It's provocative, right? He wants universities to be active, fighting forces against ignorance and stagnation, the things that led to the war. Not just ivory towers, but engaged, purposeful institutions.
But Peter has a different take on the future. He's wary of just world peace.
Yeah, he thinks it'll lead to boredom. Asks, do you remember how bored we all were in 1914?
That's a surprising point.
It is. Peace isn't enough. People need purpose, challenge. He imagines an old experimenter running things, someone who hates stagnation, likes variety. The future isn't just peace, it's the great game, an exploration.
Stagnation is forbidden. The goal is to understand, live fully, do your best.
It's a dynamic vision, very different from Oswald's focus on fixing past mistakes. Oswald likes it, though, says it's after his own heart. Wonders if Peter's world purpose is maybe the same as his world peace in the end.
And their personal plans after the war.
Peter's going back to Cambridge. Feels queer after being a grown-up married man. Shows how much the war changed him. Joan says she'll look after you first, Peter. Then shocks him by saying, Peter, I shall learn plumbing.
Plumbing, really, after all the grand ideas.
Exactly. It's so practical, so grounded. A skill. Engaging with the real world. Maybe a deliberate contrast to all the abstract systems that failed.
How do they see the future world?
Realistically, I think. Generally poor, a tired but chastened world getting itself into order again. They wonder about art, music, travel, airplanes.
But there's a sense of hope.
Yeah. They feel they've rediscovered old things, that the war knocked sense into us. Paradoxically, they think the pre-war era, with things like the Marconi scandals, had more despair than the red days of the war itself.
And Peter accepts his injuries.
He does. I don't grudge my wrist or my leg. I could hop. He's looking ahead to maybe 45, 50 years in this new world, full of his immature schemes. And Joan is there, watching him dream.
So quite a journey we've taken through these sources,
Yeah.
from Peter's rather unpromising arrival
Yeah.
to his post-war dreams of the great game and Joan's plan to take up plumbing.
We've seen these incredibly different worlds collide. The Stublins, Africa, the rigid schools, the battlefields, and how they shaped Peter and Joan.
Yeah.
And figures like Oswald and Lady Charlotte pulling in opposite directions.
Yeah, those clashes between tradition and new thinking, duty versus freedom, innocence, experience, all playing out against this backdrop of world just tearing itself apart and then trying to rebuild.
Their story, told through these glimpses, it's more than just personal history, isn't it? It reflects a whole society wrestling with what it is, what it's for. That process of change, often painful, often messy.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? For us now, facing our own huge challenges, information overload, how do we find our version of the great game? How do we sort through everything to figure out what knowledge really matters? What purpose should guide us?
And is Oswald's idea of a university militant, an education that actively engages and tries to shape the world, is that still something we need? Or something we have?
Definitely something to ponder as you continue your own deep dives.